Daniel Harper had learned how to wait better than anyone he knew. He waited in lines without complaint, waited for traffic lights even when the road was empty, waited for weekends, for promotions, for life to feel ready. Waiting had become his quiet skill, shaped over years of choosing caution over desire. On a calm evening in Portland, with rain tapping softly against his window, he stood still in his apartment and felt the weight of all that waiting pressed down on him at once. The apartment was neat, almost too neat, as if order could replace emotion. Daniel stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur in the rain. He was 42 now, an age that sounded older in his head than it felt in his heart. His reflection in the glass looked steady and composed, but behind his eyes lived a familiar restlessness. It was the same feeling that visited him late at night, the one that asked quiet questions he never answered. He had built a life that made sense, a stable job in urban planning, friendly coworkers, a routine that kept days predictable. Described him as thoughtful, reliable, calm. No one ever said passionate. That word had always felt dangerous to him, like something that could break what little balance he had learned to keep. Daniel turned away from the window and sat down at his small kitchen table. The silence of the room felt louder than usual. He tried to distract himself with his phone, scrolling through news and weather, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere too. A name he rarely allowed himself to think about anymore. Emily Carter. The memory of her did not arrive suddenly. It never did. It came slowly, like a song you don't remember until it's already playing in your head. He remembered her laugh. First, soft but certain. Then her way of listening, as if every word mattered. They had met more than 20 years ago, back when the future felt like a wide road instead of a narrow path. They met in a small bookstore cafe in Boston, both reaching for the same worn novel. The moment had been simple, almost forgettable, except that neither of them forgot it. They talked that day about books and cities and the strange fear of growing up. They kept talking for months after that, meeting between classes, sharing long walks, learning each other's dreams without realizing how fragile those dreams were. What they never shared was the truth that mattered most. Daniel had wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, but fear had always stepped in first. Fear of changing things, fear of being wrong, fear of losing what they already had. He told himself there would be time later, that clarity would come when life settled down. But life never settles. It only moves on. Emily left Boston for Seattle. After graduation, Daniel stayed. They promised to keep in touch, and for a while they did. Emails turned into short calls. Calls turned into silence. No argument ended things. No betrayal. Just distance and two people too unsure to fight against it. Years passed like pages turning too quickly. Daniel dated, but never deeply. Every connection felt measured, safe, missing something he couldn't name without admitting the truth. He watched friends fall in love, get married, start families, smiled at their happiness, and told himself he was content. Still, some nights when the city quieted, he wondered who he might have been if he had been braver once. On this evening, that wondering felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the rain, or the way time seemed to speed up, the older he got. Maybe it was the sudden realization that hesitation had cost him more than failure ever could. He opened his laptop, not sure why. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, his heart beating faster for no clear reason. He told himself he was just checking old files, old photos. But instead, he typed her name into the search bar, Emily Carter. Her profile appeared easily, as if waiting. She looked older, of course, but still unmistakably herself. The same thoughtful eyes, the same calm smile. She had built a life, too. Seattle, work in community outreach, photos of sunsets and coffee mugs and quiet moments. A life that looked full, yet familiar in its simplicity. Daniel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A wave of regret rose in him, not sharp but deep. He thought of all the times he had chosen not to act, not to speak, not to risk. He had believed hesitation was wisdom, but now it felt like a habit that had slowly shaped his life without his permission. Across the country, Emily sat alone in her apartment, unaware of the thoughts unfolding in Portland. Her evening was quiet, in a different way. It's the kind of quiet that comes after a long day of helping others carry their problems. She had spent years listening, supporting, encouraging. She was good at it, but when she closed her door at night, she often wondered who would listen to her. Emily had loved once after Daniel, deeply and sincerely. It ended gently, without anger, but it left behind a carefulness she never quite let go of. She learned how to be independent, how to find meaning in her work, how to enjoy her own company. Still, there were parts of her heart she kept locked away, parts shaped by an old what-if she rarely admitted. Back in Portland, Daniel opened a blank message window. His pulse quickened. He told himself this was unnecessary, that reaching out after all this time might only reopen old wounds. But another thought followed, quieter and stronger. What if silence was the real wound? He began typing, then stopped, deleted, typed again. Each version sounded either too distant or too emotional. He wanted to be honest without being overwhelming, simple without being cold. His fingers trembled slightly, a small but telling sign of how much this mattered. He thought about the man he had been at 20, full of dreams and hesitation. Thought about the man he was now, steadier but still afraid. And for the first time he allowed himself to feel the fear without letting it decide for him. He typed slowly, choosing words that felt true. "Hi, Emily. I don't know if you'll want to hear from me after all this time. I just wanted to say I've been thinking about you, and I hope you're doing well." He read it once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't explain everything, but it was real. His finger hovered over the send button. This was the moment he had avoided his entire life. Not the message itself, but what it represented. Action, risk, the possibility of disappointment or something far more unsettling, hope. Daniel took a deep breath and pressed send. The message left his screen, and with it went years of silence. He sat back, his heart racing, a strange mix of relief and fear settling into his chest. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if she would reply or if this small act would change anything at all. But for the first time in a long while, he felt awake. Minutes passed slowly. He closed his laptop, then opened it again. He stood up, paced, sat back down, told himself not to expect anything. He reminded himself that reaching out was about honesty, not outcome. Still, his attention stayed fixed on the screen. In Seattle, Emily's phone lit up softly on the table. She glanced at it without interest at first, then froze when she saw the name, Daniel Harper. For a moment, she wondered if it was a mistake, if her mind was filling in gaps that weren't there. She picked up the phone and read the message once. Then again, a rush of emotion surprised her. Not excitement exactly, not fear either, but a sudden awareness of something unfinished. Memories surfaced without effort. The bookstore cafe. Long talks. The feeling that something important had been left unsaid. She sat very still, the room quiet around her. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to protect the careful life she had built. Another part, long quiet but still alive, felt seen in a way she hadn't expected. Emily set the phone down and walked to her window. The city lights reflected against the dark glass, reminding her of how many nights she had spent wondering about the choices she never made. She had learned how to be strong, how to move forward, but strength had also become a shield. She asked herself a simple question. Was she afraid of the past, or afraid of feeling something again? The question stayed with her as she returned to the table. She picked up the phone once more, her fingers steady. She didn't know what this message would lead to, but she knew what silence had already taken from her. She typed her reply carefully. "Hi, Daniel. Didn't expect to hear from you. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too." She paused, then added one more sentence, honest and unguarded. "It's nice to hear from you." When she sent it, she felt a small shift inside her, like a door opening just enough to let light in. In Portland, Daniel's laptop chimed softly. He stared at the screen, his breath catching as he read her words. They were simple, but they carried warmth, and that warmth moved through him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He smiled without, realizing it a quiet, genuine smile. The past had answered him, not with certainty, but with possibility. Neither of them knew where this path would lead. They only knew that something had begun, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. Sometimes honesty is the bravest thing of all. Emily sat on her couch, phone in hand, staring at Daniel's reply. It was short, simple, and yet it carried years of absence in a single line. She felt her heart thump in a way it hadn't for decades, not with fear exactly, but with something she had buried long ago: curiosity, longing, and a quiet hope. She leaned back, letting her mind wander to the memory she thought she had carefully locked away. The sound of rain tapping against her window mirrored the tension building inside her, a soft rhythm that echoed her thoughts. Daniel, back in Portland, felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness after sending his first message. He had expected silence, rejection, maybe even discomfort, but her reply had surprised him. It was polite yet warm, cautious yet open. It left space for something new to grow, and for the first time in years he felt a genuine pulse of anticipation instead of hesitation. He stared at the screen, reading her words repeatedly, trying to absorb the reality that she had responded. They began texting daily. At first, the conversations were careful, deliberate, almost like testing the water. They asked about each other's lives, shared small stories of ordinary days, and laughed softly at memories that were neither heavy nor dramatic, but sweetly familiar. The more they talked, the more Daniel realized how much he had missed her. Presence not in a romanticized way, but in a way that had shaped his every cautious decision over the years. Emily discovered that the years had changed him, but not enough to erase the person she remembered. His calm steadiness now carried a softness, a depth she had not anticipated. Within days, they moved from texting to phone calls. Hearing each other's voices brought a new layer of intimacy. They didn't rush into emotions. Instead, they allowed themselves to feel the ease of being known without pretense. Daniel would share a detail from his workday, and Emily would listen, genuinely curious. She shared small victories from her career, the moments of kindness she witnessed in her community. Work, and he absorbed them, realizing he had longed for these small exchanges more than he had admitted. Each call ended reluctantly, a pause neither wanted to break, signaling how slowly the gap of years was being bridged. Despite the warmth, fear still lingered in both of them. Emily feared the intensity of old feelings returning too quickly, while Daniel feared that a lifetime of hesitation could still make him overthink every step. Yet the fear was different now. It no longer controlled them. It was present as a quiet reminder, not a blockade, and that difference mattered. They began to discuss the past gently, revisiting the moments that had shaped their silence without placing blame or regret. They spoke of their first meetings, of dreams shared in college cafes, of choices that had kept them apart. Each story they told felt like a stitch in the fabric of trust slowly being rewoven. Then Daniel suggested meeting in person. He proposed. A town halfway between Portland and Seattle, a neutral place where neither had attachments or expectations. Emily hesitated, her mind full of old caution and memories of disappointment. Yet she also felt the pull of curiosity stronger than her. Fear? She realized that she wanted to see him, to measure what remained of their connection in the real world rather than just through screens. After a long pause, she agreed. The day they met arrived with a quiet tension. Emily drove into this small town, her nerves a mix of anticipation and apprehension. She entered the cafe where they had agreed to meet, and the bell above the door jingled as she walked in. Her eyes scanned the room, and there he was, Daniel. Older, steadier, the same man she remembered, but layered with time and experience. They both froze for a moment, absorbing the reality of each other's presence. Before the weight of years and hesitation melted into the gentle relief of recognition. They greeted each other with a warm, unhurried smile, the kind that spoke of familiarity and comfort without rushing into drama. Their first conversation in person was slow and careful, as if testing the water once again. They spoke about their journey to get there, the cities they lived in, the lives they had built. But beneath the surface, they felt the old connection, threading through every word, every glance, every subtle gesture. There were no grand declarations, no overwhelming confessions, only the realization that the bond they had never fully expressed had survived the years. As the afternoon moved forward, they shared a meal and talked more freely. Laughter returned easily, bridging the gap of years without effort. They recounted old memories, stories from their youth that had seemed trivial at the time, but now felt precious. The conversation shifted from past to present to what they wanted in life now, in the moment. Without forcing answers or promises, Daniel spoke about his work in urban planning, the projects he was proud of, and the subtle regrets that had come from decisions made out of caution rather than desire. Emily shared her experiences in community outreach, the small ways she had tried to make a difference, and the lessons learned from heartbreaks she had survived. The atmosphere between them was gentle, but charged with an unspoken intensity. They did not rush to define their relationship, yet every gesture carried the weight of decades of hesitation now being confronted. They walked through the quiet streets of the town after their meal, the cool air filled with the scent of rain-washed pavement. Daniel's hand brushed against Emily's briefly, a touch that spoke volumes without words. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself feel it, letting the moment exist without forcing it into labels or expectations. As they continued walking, Daniel spoke softly about fear and hesitation. He admitted how often he had let opportunities pass by because he had been afraid, and how often he had wondered what it would have been like to be braver. Emily listened, recognizing the honesty in his words, feeling the echo of her own past caution mirrored in his experiences. She realized that they had both been prisoners of fear, but now, together, they were free to take small, deliberate steps forward. They stopped by a small park bench overlooking a quiet pond. The water reflected the fading light of the late afternoon, calm and unhurried. Daniel looked at Emily and said, "I spent a lifetime being afraid. I don't want to do that anymore." His voice was steady, but the vulnerability in it was undeniable. Emily met his gaze and felt a lump rise in her throat, a mix of relief, hope, and recognition. "Neither do I," she replied simply, truthfully. No promises were made that evening. No declarations of forever. They understood that the future was uncertain, as all futures are, but they also understood something far more important: the choice to be present, to act despite fear, to speak despite hesitation. That choice, subtle but powerful, had opened a door that had been closed for far too long. They sat on the bench for a while, side by side, talking softly, comfortable in silence, letting the world move around them while their own small world expanded quietly, intentionally. As night fell, they walked back to their cars, the air cool and filled with the soft sounds of crickets and distant city life. There was no rush, no dramatic climax, only a shared awareness of the delicate beginning they had taken together. Daniel reached for Emily's hand, and this time she held it, letting it linger. It was a gesture that spoke of trust, courage, and a willingness to embrace what had once seemed impossible. Driving back to their respective cities, both felt a profound shift. Emily felt lighter, as if a weight of unspoken words had been lifted. Daniel felt a quiet joy, tempered with the knowledge that life still required patience and understanding. But that action, choosing to confront fear, had changed everything. In the weeks that followed, they continued to see each other, traveling to neutral cities, meeting for long conversations, exploring spaces that allowed them to reconnect slowly, deliberately. Every encounter strengthened the bond, but never in a rushed or overwhelming way. They learned to communicate openly, to share fears, hopes, and dreams without pressure. The hesitation that had defined decades of their lives was slowly replaced by a deliberate, courageous willingness to take small risks for the chance at something meaningful. Over time, they realized that love was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about consistent honesty, care, and vulnerability. They had both waited for years, hesitated in the shadows of fear, but by choosing to act, even gently, they had opened the door to a life that could finally include the connection they had always wanted. The story of Daniel and Emily did not end with certainty, nor did it promise a flawless future. But it carried a truth far deeper than hesitation or fear. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply to act, to speak, to reach across the gap of years and silence, and to choose connection over avoidance. And in that choice, they discovered the possibility of a love both tender and real, unfolding at its own pace, shaped by honesty, patience, and the courage to finally do what they had once been afraid to do.